Good afternoon, everybody. Interesting. So obviously Jason Edwards riding for Mildenhall on Saturday. Today it's been announced that he's riding now for Kings Lynn in top flight. But of course, unlike last season when Leon Flint signed for Wolverhampton and had to drop out the Bullets team, guess what? The promoters have changed the rules for this year. Anyway, we wish Jason all the best of luck in his time at Kings Lynn. A photo. Start off with a photo. On Wednesday, pleased to say that Sean Courtney, pictured here, will be joining us for our live chat. This was back in 1989, and I remember at Berrington every week we went along and you could get your photograph taken with a particular rider, and when it was the turn of Mark and Sean to have, you could get your picture taken with them. It was a no-brainer for me. So along with all the other little kids, I queued up, and you could see the smile on their face when they realized it was me that was queuing up to get my photo, because all the kids were sitting on the bike and being held in place, you know, and I was not going to go and sit on the bike. No, that was going to be too patronizing, if you like. So I went and joined them at the back, and that's part of the reason why they're smiling, of course, is because of the a bit of a big kid I am. And of course, Mark Courtney, the reason I was a Berwick fan back then, back in '88, we started going to me, ex-wife and brother-in-law, Powder Hall on the Friday, Berwick on the Saturday. But ex-wife Sonia and Andy, brother-in-law, had followed Leicester up until their closure, and they knew Mark. Well, they saw that it was Mark the Kid Courtney that was riding for Berwick. And so when I asked, you know, but I realised that we go and watch Edinburgh and we go and watch Berwick, but who are we actually supporting? And I was told in no uncertain tones, Berwick. So that was it. And the reason for Berwick, of course, was because Mark Courtney was riding for them. We'll get on to Sean in a minute. We'll have a look at his career. But first of all, Mark, speaking with his sons, Jamie and Scott, I said it would be really nice to get Mark on for a live chat. And they said, well, he doesn't really do those sort of interviews anymore. Seems he's a bit shy in his old age, which was a far cry from what he was like back in 88, 89, 90 season. Anyway, let's, I've got the next article up ready to go. So let's do that. And I have to thank Andrew Silver for pointing this place out for me. He talked about the fact that Dave Walsh is also on here. And what's good about the Dave Walsh on Speedway Plus is that it's actually an interview with him rather than just a look at the career of, in this case, Mark Courtney. But you can see you've got your riders to remember. Interestingly here, you've got a program generator. So that would be a thing to look at in the future. It says here this article was first published at the end of the 2000 season. Okay, here we go. One of the success stories of the season has been the return of Mark Courtney. Mark has made the transition from jailbird to heat leader remarkably easily. Prior to this season, Mark hadn't raced since 1993. This was the year that he made an unsuccessful return to former club Middlesbrough. An incident in a Swindon hotel room that Mark still insists he was not responsible led for his sacking, and he drifted into retirement. Sports stars often encounter problems after retiring, and Mark was no different. He became involved in the movement of drugs, got caught, and was sentenced to 6 years in prison. It was all a long way from his early days in Speedway. Mark's career started at Barrow, and he showed much promise in a poor Furness Flyers side. His teammates included veteran Charlie Monk and the controversial Jeff Pusey. The Flyers were short-lived, and Mark joined Middlesbrough in 1979. He stayed for 3 years and quickly developed into one of the finest riders in the National League. In 1982, he made the step up to the British League with the Leicester Lions, currently the subject of some debate in the Star letter page of 2000, that is. I wonder what that was. Maybe that was the talk about the Lions being reborn. His rapid improvement continued, and when the Lions closed at the end of 83, he was their number one. So yes, Sonia and Andy would have seen him as the star of the Leicester Lions team, and I know they were very, very disappointed when Leicester shut, and there was a huge amount of animosity, Leicester fans then, towards Charles Ochiltree, who also owned Coventry, who was apparently saying that, I've closed Leicester. If they want Speedway, it's not far along the M69 to Coventry. Mark's career was never to reach these heights again, as far as a heat leader in the top league. 1984 saw Mark Courtney join Bellevue. The Aces had an extremely powerful side, and Mark found the points harder to come by. His average dipped, and it was no real surprise when the points limit forced him out at the year's end. He headed for Kings Lynn, and there his downward spiral continued. The following year, he dropped back to National League racing and rejoined Middlesbrough. A young British League number one in 1983 had become a National League rider by 1986. He was not the only big name to drop down that year. He found himself joined by Dave Jessup, Malcolm Simmons, and of course Les Collins, who was also with Leicester. This was largely due to the rapidly diminishing size of the upper tier. Mark enjoyed a decent season, but should possibly have dominated more than he did. Once again, he was on the move after only 1 year. This time he made the short hop to Newcastle's Brough Park. He should have been a great capture for the Federation's Special Diamonds, but found himself being overshadowed by, amongst others, Dave Blackburn, Dave Morton, and Tom Owen. The latter two both, by this stage, well past their best. The Diamonds were late withdrawals from the 1988 league. By this, and I presume they mean by this time, Mark had already moved on to Berwick. Bandits promoter David Fairbairn made positive noises about the capture of Courtney. Few believed that Mark would justify his faith, but this time Mark got it right. He practiced hard and was reborn by the time the season started. His early season form was brilliant, and it just kept on going. In retrospect, this was probably the most consistent season of his career. He remained with the Bandits until the end of 1990. His consistency had slipped a little by that time, but he was still a real force to be reckoned with. Berwick opted to join the all-new Division 1 in 1991, and Mark opted to retire. He resurfaced at Glasgow as team coach, but was soon embroiled in controversy as he replaced Kenny McKinnon in the Tigers side. Yeah, a couple of things to bear in mind there. Last night, both Graham mentioned it, and I've seen footage of Mark Courtney scoring a 15-point maximum at Powder Hall to help Berwick win away at Powder Hall, and he sometimes Mark Gates and on a couple of occasions, he certainly passes Les Collins, and I think he passes like Jamie Luckhurst as well. Absolutely brilliant maximum. And it was interesting when I spoke to him first time and asked him about that. He said, "Yeah, I had a really good engine tuner, a really top-notch engine, which lasted for, you know, he said it lasted for so many meetings, and then it blew up, and he wasn't able to get one quite as good as that." But I presume that's what an FAF engine, as referred to by Greg Bartosz Blair, is. So anyway, the other interesting thing, of course, Kenny McKinnon. I remember again in that 1988 season, seeing, I think it was the very first meeting I went to at Berwick was against Glasgow, and Kenny McKinnon was in the Glasgow side, and he was unbeaten going into the latter stages of the meeting, and so was Mark. And of course, it was one of the highlights of the meeting was the long-awaited clash of Mark Courtney versus Kenny McKinnon. And there was no doubt about who was going to come out on top of that one. And Mark duly collected another maximum. He controversially, as he replaced Kenny McKinnon in the Tigers side. This put him under immediate pressure, but he scored reasonably well. He partnered Jason Lyons, and his brilliant team riding was a joy to watch. A very public falling out with Neil McFarlane ensured that he would once again be moving on in 1992. He joined his brother Sean in the mammoth weekly trek to Rye House. Both brothers did a job for the Rockets, but it was only ever likely to be for one season. Mark then completed his the first phase of his career with that ill-fated return to Middlesbrough. Interesting about Middlesbrough, it was in 1989 that when we went to Middlesbrough, I think the first time we went, now it got rained off, and then when we went back, it was, I can't remember what heat it was, but one of the Middlesbrough reserves T-boned Rob Grant and sent him flying forward. Did a lot of damage to his shoulder and his chest. Had to then withdraw from the meeting. Berwick did manage to win that meeting, but it was close because of Rob Grant's injury. And I always remember afterwards at the bar on the like the back straight, chatting away to Rob, who was sat down, clearly in discomfort. But Rob Grant, hard as nails. And every time somebody said to him, you know, you need to go to hospital to get that checked. Oh, no, I'll be fine. Well, I think eventually it was Mark that actually ended up taking him to hospital, where, of course, it was discovered he'd broken several ribs. But as I say, Rob Grant, hard as nails, was not wanting to go to hospital, was of the opinion that, you know, it was nothing much and he could just carry on, even though, well, at one time, I think he was coughing up a bit of blood as well. But eventually he took Mark's advice. Anyway, that's Mark's career. Obviously, we look forward to having a chat with Scott and Jamie at some point in the future. They said that they would come on and have a chat, and it would be interesting to hear what they have to say about their old man and the fantastic legacy that he has left in the form of those two boys. So, as I say, Wednesday, hugely looking forward to catching up with Sean. Let's have a look at what Sean has been up to. So once again, on the Speedway Plus site, that's quite an old Sean there. That's not the Sean I remember when I first started following Berwick. You compare that with the picture of him in his white leathers. Let's just do a little comparison again. Yeah, that's the Sean I remember. I don't remember this other Sean quite so much. Sean first came to attention when he signed for Middlesbrough Tigers in 1981. His elder brother Mark was an already established star in the Cleveland Park side, and the prospect of his younger brother treading the same path to success was an exciting one. Sadly, injury prevented Sean from making much of an impact with the Tigers, never even appearing in the side, and he moved to Edinburgh out of the shadow of his brother. It was with Edinburgh that he first made an impression on the sport. He broke into the Monarchs side in the 1983 season, displacing the experienced Glyn Taylor midway through the year. The breakthrough was hard fought, as Sean often seemed to experience great difficulty in keeping a machine of his own on track. Often he'd appear on borrowed machinery or something cobbled together from various sources. He made the most of the opportunity presented to him and established himself as a solid reserve come second string in the Monarch side. It's fair to say that he was considered something of a hot prospect during his time with Edinburgh, though the expected breakthrough never seemed to quite happen. It wasn't a happy time for the club generally in the mid-80s, particularly during a horrendous 1984 season when virtually all of the side spent time out injured. Sean moved on to Berwick early in 1985. Edinburgh received Phil Jeffrey and Scott Lamb in exchange, and both sides seemed happy enough with the settlement. Lamb included as a makeweight in what was principally a Jeffrey Courtney swap, went on to perform admirably over many years for the Monarchs and the Bandits. Sean rode for Berwick until the end of the 89 season and was a formidable opponent around their Barrington Lough home, though his away scoring tended to be rather indifferent. I think that's a bit unfair, as I say. Just as we see that video of Mark and Dave Walsh completing the Bandits' victory over Poole, I just remember, Sean going out for his fourth ride, and I think he'd managed something like 4 second places, but he certainly hadn't finished last, and he had been a real thorn in the side of Poole, and he went round on a well-deserved lap of honour, although I suspect it was partly to rub it in that Berwick were likely to win. And yes, as I say here, went on to perform admirably over many years for the Monarchs. Sean rode for Berwick until the end of 1989 season, and he was formidable around Barrington Lough. Both him and Mark, very good. Though his away scoring tended to be rather indifferent. He often seemed to start the season in blistering form, suggesting that his long-awaited big breakthrough had occurred, then tended to tail off as the season progressed. His variable form led to him appearing as both reserve and heat leader, though he was generally considered to be a good second string. His time in the Borders was soured when a dispute with the club left him on the sidelines, reportedly withholding his services for a month or two. Well, I think it was... I think from what I remember, it was to do with sponsorship that he was going to get. And I remember a meeting that we went to at the beginning of '89, and he'd had an engine blow up on him. And it was actually myself, Andy, and Sonia that organised a bucket collection, or at least we were going to do a collection for Sean at the track, and we'd got permission from the club to do so. But when we arrived, Sean said, no, I've actually withdrawn my services because of a dispute over sponsorship. But I do remember that he did manage to secure one rather interesting sponsorship, and that was that he got himself a set of golf clubs supplied to him because he loves golf. So nothing Speedway related, but the idea was that his love of golf would then be transferred to people who would notice that he was being sponsored by golf club manufacturers or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, withholding his services for a month or two, as I say, we never actually got to do our collection. We even got the buckets, went and got the buckets specially to do the collection, and we're told, no, we can't do it. Never mind, okay. He moved back over the border in 1990 and joined up with Glasgow Tigers, the transfer being funded by new promoter Peter McBride, who would become a good friend of the entire Courtney clan. By now, it was accepted that Sean had found his level. He would produce solid scoring in the 6 to 7 point average bracket, and the great expectations that had surrounded his early career were long forgotten. His elder brother Mark's career had also floundered, and he was now back in lower division racing after a top flight career that took in spells with Leicester, Bellevue, and Kings Lynn. The brothers shared the same carefree attitude to life and racing. Mark liked the odd glass of pop. Sean teetotal. I don't quite know where they get that idea from, but anyway, this is really, really interesting, isn't it? It's like this bit. The brothers shared the same carefree attitude to life and racing, but their riding styles were very different. Mark was a classic armchair stylist, very similar to Lee Adams on a bike. Hold on a sec. The original armchair stylist was none other than Jimmy Nielsen, who obviously, famously rode for Berwick. Sean was that bit bigger and always seemed to sit tall in the saddle, making his style a little more unorthodox and certainly not as free-flowing as his brothers. Is he that much bigger? Not sure about that. I'd have to say, okay, marginally. I suppose, yeah, Mark's stood upright. Sean's got a little bit of a lean on, so maybe, yeah, okay. But it's not a huge amount, is it? Anyway, back to the other one. Okay. The two brothers were teammates at Glasgow in 1991 when Mark was introduced, amidst much acrimony when Kenny McKenna was axed from the side. The pair provided strong backing for Steve Lawson, Shane Bowes, and Jason Lyons as the Tigers charged up near the top of the table. Yeah, I remember when Shane Bowes and Lyons arrived, and they were pretty formidable, weren't they? Big changes were afoot at Glasgow the following year, and both Courtneys were left out of the side. Sean phoned every promoter in the land looking for a deal and was delighted to accept an offer to join Rye House. Most certainly a long way from his traditional northern beat, but a job's a job. Brother Mark tagged along also, and Sean performed his usual middle order job in his only season in the South. It was no great surprise, when Sean opted to ride closer to home the following season, and he rejoined Edinburgh in 1983, still operating from Powder Hall at that time. That was the season when each team consisted of 8 riders and meetings were staged over 18 heats. The format employed made things a little different for middle order riders like Sean in order to protect the young reserves at 7 and 8 in the sides, it was decided they'd only have one race that wasn't exclusively against their fellow reserves. This meant that Sean was facing heat leaders in virtually every race, and some of the easy points from previous seasons were missing. As ever, he made a decent contribution to the team, and it was a little surprising when he wasn't retained by the Monarchs for 1994. Presumably, the points limit played at least a part in that decision. It seemed that nobody else could accommodate him either, and the season started without him. His saviour was the formation of the third division, the forerunner of today's Conference League. The reduced operating costs at that level allowed clubs like Stoke and Berwick, who had both dropped out of the sport at the end of 1992, to reopen with a lower cost basis. Sean lived locally to the Berwick track and was an obvious choice to lead the new team. He agreed terms and pulled on the black and gold race jacket once more in some early season challenge meetings. Injuries are part and parcel of Speedway, and when Jesper Olsen copped an unfortunate one, it opened the door for Sean to replace him in the Glasgow team. He was therefore back in professional racing before the season had reached its midway point, and his performances helped Glasgow to retain the Division 2 championship they had won the previous year. It was to be Sean's only championship win. It also concluded a curious sequence that had seen Sean move from Edinburgh to Berwick to Glasgow, spend a season with Rye House, then once again move directly from Edinburgh to Berwick to Glasgow. Talk about retracing your steps. Radical change hit the sport over the winter, and the top two divisions amalgamated into a single Premier League. The redistribution of riders was a shambles. You're not kidding. And Glasgow, in common with many of their former lower league rivals, were unable to strengthen their side to any great extent. It really was. It was very, very poor. You had some of the elite, the top tier teams that were unwilling to offer the services of their riders to the other teams in the second division. And so this whole idea of having the one league, the disparity between the strength of the top first division teams not allowing any of their star riders to join any of the smaller teams, it was just a farce. But interesting thing for me now, though, is that given the current situation where, for example, Sam Masters is number one in both the first and second division, if you had the same amalgamation now, I reckon you'd have a pretty good chance of making it a success. But anyway, that's only my opinion. That allowed Sean to retain his place and ride against the world's best on a weekly basis. Paying for those riders didn't come cheap, and Glasgow collapsed in a pile of debt at the season's end, leaving Sean on the sidelines once again. His only action in '96 came in a short mid-season spell with Bellevue, one of the reduced number of clubs in the all-embracing Premier League. He never found any kind of form and announced his retirement from the sport. That wasn't to be the end of the story. In an almost direct reversal of decisions taken 2 years previously, the Premier League was split into upper and lower divisions in 1997, now to be christened the Elite and the Premier Leagues. And, that split was, I don't think it was amicable, because really it was what were called then the Premier League teams. They were used to try and help prop up the Elite League. And I don't think the Premier League got any thanks for their efforts in trying to help them. Now to be christened Elite in Premier Leagues, a number of clubs were able to reopen or move up from the Conference League, and these riders needed competent performers. Glasgow were amongst the clubs returning to the sport, and they turned to Sean to fill one of the gaps in the side. He came in on a handy low average thanks to his struggles for Bellevue the previous summer, and he proved a capable number 4 in a side led by Neil Collins, remember Neil Collins, he always had a neckerchief, didn't he? Mick Powell and Stuart McDonald. The new Premier League gave Sean a new lease of life, and he rode for Glasgow until May of 2000. During that time, the club moved from Shawfield to Ashfield, and Sean was a virtual ever-present. He also used this time to mentor his nephew, Scott, through the first steps of his career, the pair actually both appearing in the same Tigers side on a number of occasions. His departure from Glasgow in the first May of the millennium was pre-planned and marked his retirement from the sport. He had intended to retire at the end of the 99 season, but agreed to start the following year and then give way when his brother Mark was available to replace him. Mark had spent some time, quote, away, yes, and his release date wasn't until May. Sean's scores in the early seasons weren't up to his usual standard, and it was clear that his heart was no longer in it. His contribution to the sport was marked later in the year by a farewell meeting at Ashfield. A good crowd turned out to pay tribute to Sean's show, and his career was at an end. He now manages Berwick Bandits in their home fixtures. He certainly does. And I'm really, as I say, looking forward to having a chat with Sean about all sorts of things. But I'll make a list. And give him a bit of prior warning. Anyway, as I said, I'd like to thank Andrew Silver, who was the person that actually alerted me to a article on that same Speedway post about Dave Walsh. Mark, Sean and Dave Walsh appear to be the only bandits of that 89 side that are actually that there's any articles about. Not to worry, we'll crack on with other things that I've got lined up that I'd like to share. I think that's about it, really. I'm going to say cheerio and take those dogs for another walk, and we'll catch you soon. Bye for now.